The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those Knuckleheads of Liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
It is April 17th, 2023, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. Among the topics we're going to be discussing today are the big issues about data and public policy and why the Biden administration always seems to not like American fossil fuels over foreign fossil fuels. I don't quite understand the distinction, but before we get into that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the Word Brathwaite, last word in liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And in our lower left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. And joining us in our right-hand corner today is Jim Lakely, Vice President and Director of Communications for the Heartland Institute, a free market think tank that focuses on the environment and energy, among other topics. And we did a recent we did a recent interview with him that you can check out as well if you want to learn a little more about the Heartland Institute and what they do. I guess let's jump right into it. So, data, what can you trust? There's all these public policy. They're trying to encroach on our freedoms constantly. And James, our invisible hand, maybe you could bring this up. We saw this most recently with COVID, right? I mean, it's essentially the experts just lied to us in some cases, and this is literally Slate here, acknowledging that Tony Fauci lied on some things, but they think his lies were noble, so that's okay. But it's actually kind of crazy. I mean, you even had Robert Redfield, former CDC director, saying that, hey, look, what the NIH and Tony Fauci did were antithetical to science, and he said that in front of Congress. So, I mean, this isn't just people outside the government who are concerned with what the government is doing. This is people who are literally inside the government, and the mechanisms of it are saying, hey, what the heck is going on here? This is some crazy stuff that's going on. And of course, if you recall, during the whole COVID thing, Fauci and Collins were communicating with each other, talking about how they were going to silence people who weren't on board with their narrative. They were talking about the Jay Bhattacharya and some other scientists who were talking about, hey, maybe lockdowns aren't the best way to go. And he said there needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises, when they were talking about Jay Bhattacharya and a few of the other guys he had signed on who were, very well-respected scientists out there. And of course, we've come to find out that a lot of the stuff that Fauci had told us about masks and other things were just absolutely nuts. He lied to us in the beginning, or at least he says he lied to us. It actually sounded like he might have got it right when he said that masks are kind of ineffective at first. And then he said that was a lie and told us to wear masks. And then he said wear two masks. But now we're starting to see studies come out. This is from City Journal talking about this Cochrane study where they came through and they said, hey, look, this stuff, it was just not effective in the conclusions. They said that the surgical masks and those N95 masks, they said, just weren't very effective in dealing with this whole thing. So, anyways, so that brings us to climate, right? Because climate has a lot of the similar alarmism going on here. And so it's like, where do you get your data from, right? I mean, who do we trust? And, we see people on both sides of this kind of scratching their head. Here's an article that you can that I linked to from Heartland, actually, and it was why we need an independent global climate temperature base. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But there's people on the other side too who are saying, hey, some of the numbers we're hearing aren't always the best either. But the crazy thing is, no one will talk about it. And it's funny, Heartland was one of the few places where I saw that there were debates going on this stuff. But I recall when Trump got elected, that was one of the things I actually heard from a few people in his administration is, hey, maybe we should have some public debates on this topic. And it just got shut down right away. So anyways, let me kick this to you guys at this point. What do you guys think of this issue? Maybe, Jim, you want to jump in first and talk about your perspectives? You guys have spent a lot of time on this whole climate issue.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to hear you guys take two. So I'll just go very quickly. Look, the only place, the story you have up on the screen there from Politico is from 2017. Perry calls for climate change debate, says he doesn't know Trump's stance. Trump's stance on the climate was that we did need debate, as it turns out. One of the first big things that Donald Trump did was remove us from the so-called Paris Climate Agreement, in which, in fact, the president of the Heartland Institute at the time, Joe Bass, was invited to sit in the Rose Garden while he made that announcement. That's how key Heartland's communications on this had in the thinking of the then Trump White House on this topic. And so he took us out of the Paris Climate Agreement because he realized and recognized that it actually had nothing to do with the climate. The Paris Climate Agreement had everything to do with the redistribution of wealth from wealthy Western countries to less wealthy non-Western countries, and then even if the Paris Accord would work, it wasn't actually going to affect the global temperature at all. If everybody followed to the letter the limits on our energy production that the Paris Climate Accords laid out, it would not affect the global temperature at all. We can't affect the weather by swapping out our SUVs for electric vehicles, but especially because China and India and other emerging economies like Brazil were not adherents to this. China is building 2 new coal plants a week. We are shutting down coal plants all over this country and replacing them with nothing or unreliable wind and solar. So it's basically the Paris Climate Accord, which of course the Biden administration put us right back in, is an economic a death cult. That's what that is, because it's going to make our economies weaker. And what do you know? A weaker economy, makes somehow it always seems to make the population easier to control because they become more dependent on government for their own survival. So that's really what this was. That's why Trump got us out of it, and we're back in it again because the Biden administration, frankly, is with the with the globalists. I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but is with the agenda of the United Nations and the World Economic Forum and all of them, that we have to reorder our society, and we have to rethink capitalism by basically destroying it for the good of humanity. But actually, all it really turns out is for the good of them and for the ruling class. It gives them more power and gives you less economic power and less individual liberty.
But we know that the central planners, whatever they touch, always turns to misery, and dealing with data will be no different. So whatever misinformation, whatever narrative that they want to put out, they will use data, quote unquote, to spread the message, whether it's message of fear, message of global warming, message of whatever. They always dare to do something, but their something is always about control, about taking away our liberties. And look at what happened during COVID. Jason Rose COVID. Look at what happened with COVID. Okay, Fauci and company was spreading their wonderful message. Oh, we got to wear masks. Oh, we got to be locked down. They locked down the schools based upon their data. Up to this day, they cannot produce a single case or anywhere a number of cases where a kid actually spread some sort of COVID disease to a teacher. But they shut down the schools. Our kids have suffered because of this. But this is what happens when the government, the central planners, touch stuff. Whether it's data about climate change, whether it's data about COVID, whether it's data about the effects of fossil fuels, it does not matter. They have a narrative in mind, and their narrative is always at the end is about our control, about the control of the voting public, and about controlling what we think, what we do, and where we live, and how we function in our society, in a society that is supposed to be founded on freedom and liberty. We have a real problem here And when the government is controlling and dispensing data, we have a real big problem. We really do.
Yeah, the answer, no matter what the problem, the answer is always the same. Isn't that funny? Every problem has the same solution: collectivism, and your freedom goes away.
Exactly. There you go.
Tim, were you trying to jump in on this one, or
maybe my what did Jim call those? The group, the climate cultist friends. Maybe when they are forced from either energy being too expensive for them to afford to run their air conditioner in Sacramento during the summer, or they just don't even have it available. They have rolling blackouts and so on and so forth. And so they're suffering in the sweltering heat of Sacramento in the summer, in the middle of July or August. Maybe then they're going to maybe rethink. Maybe? Nah, never mind.
It'll be too late, Tim. It'll be too late. Like if you think about the Biden administration actually is now ramping up and shortening the deadlines for their transition to all electric vehicles, for instance.
Yeah.
If you think about, we had blackouts dangerous blackouts that killed people in Texas just a year ago.
Yes.
And that was not with all of these vehicles being replaced by plug-in EVs. And so if you were to, I think the new mandate they just put in, it would mean by like 2025 or 2029, and in other words, very soon, 69% of all new cars would have to be electric, that you wouldn't be able to buy a regular, Honda Accord that has gasoline powered engine in it anymore. If you wanted a new one, you would have to get an electric vehicle. Our grid right now, if we were to build, if we were to double our nuclear capabilities for energy production in this country tomorrow, if we could just snap our fingers, that's not how it works. But just to say you could do that, our grid could not handle all the plug-in cars that we have. So you have to wonder to yourself, they must know this. I mean, they may be evil because they want to take away your freedom, but they're not stupid. They can actually read charts and understand that we will not have the energy capacity to handle all of these plug-in vehicles. So then what do you have to conclude? They don't care. And in fact, not having the power capability to plug in all those electric vehicles is the point. That's the policy goal. They don't want you to have your own personal vehicle, period. Because if you were to implement a policy to get as many people out of their own personal transportation as possible, what policy would you implement? This one. This is the policy you would implement, because we can't, not only can people not afford it because electric vehicles are very, very expensive, but we don't have the grid capacity for all of these vehicles. So if you wanted to get everybody out of the personal transportation, and personal transportation is one of the most common expressions of your individual liberty and your autonomy, you can go where you want, when you want, without asking permission or waiting for a bus or a train or cramming into things like that. If you wanted to stop that as being something that's part of everybody's life as a free individual in a supposedly free country, this is exactly the policy you would implement, and you would accelerate it as the Biden administration is doing. So it's not about saving the planet or anything like that. It's about getting you out of your car for good.
Jim, I think you give some of those guys too much credit, as far as actually understanding what's going on, because, it's funny that to a large degree for the rest of the country, this is a virtue signal. I mean, for California, they've at least altered their grid so that this is a bigger mix, I guess, of clean energy. But for the rest of the country, it's largely fossil fuel on the grid. So if they switch to electric cars, all they're doing is just, masking, I guess, the fossil footprint of the car, but they're not actually getting rid of the fossil footprint. So it just seems kind of a little bit crazy. But then in California, where they have altered their grid, there's not enough electricity of that type. So then, we just had last summer where, I believe it was last summer, where they told people, hey, it's great that you guys are all getting on those electric cars, but we're short on electricity, so don't charge your car today.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the lunacy. That's the lunacy of their policies, right? They want us to go to this, and Jimmy, you're right. They want us to go to electric cars, but they don't. At certain points in time, you're not going to be able to even charge the electric car. Okay, so you're right. They probably have some intent of getting us out of our personal transportation. But this is where we go again. Government controlling narratives, controlling data to produce, and data, I put that in quotes, by the way, to produce a society where we are less free. That's what's going on.
Well, if it's going that direction, then isn't there a downside they can see for the government itself? And if they're going to impoverish the entire economy of the United States and reduce the GDP appropriately, or as part of that whole impoverishment, then won't that trickle up to the government to where they no longer? I mean, I know they don't mind deficit spending and just print the money. I get that. And maybe that's their long-term goal, is just keep printing and all that. But if there's no wealth anymore, very little, it's diminished from their lack of fossil fuels, which are tied to wealth. And it's the only way we can have wealth moving forward is with fossil fuels, folks. Sorry to burst your electric bubble, but if that's the case, don't they see a downside for government itself? I know all the people at the top are still their extremely huge energy dependent mansions. I get that. The White House is still going to continue, and they'll just have just as many servants and armed guards as ever before. I get that, but don't they see any downside whatsoever? Any unintended consequences? Jim, what do you think?
Wow. I would like for you to name me some examples where leftists grabbing power ever anticipated any unintended consequences or were actually even held accountable for them. And the answer is actually zero.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the left is endlessly and romantically speaking of revolution. Well, if we keep going down this road, they're going to get that revolution, but I don't think it's going to be the one they anticipated. This is societal crumbling stuff that we are experiencing happening right now, and I'm sure you guys have talked about the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab on your show in the past. If you haven't, I'd be happy to come back. We could do 3 hours on it. It'd be great.
Okay.
But
we'll take you up on that.
Yeah.
I think we will.
But he says, you will eat the bugs, right? We have to stop agriculture and the raising of beef cattle and pork and all of that. And everybody should just be transitioning to eating bugs as protein. Do you think Bill Gates, when he flies on his private jet to Davos, is eating bugs? I don't. And do you think in the future, if they actually get their way and a good portion of our regular protein in the grocery store is replaced by, ground up bugs that's made to kind of taste like hamburger if you put enough spices in it, do you think those guys are going to be buying that, or are they going to be importing their Wagyu beef from somewhere else that you can't get it? I think the latter, and that's the way it always works. When you slide into when they take everybody else's freedom away, but they are so selfishly and they're keeping it for themselves. I just hope that as a society we wake up, that when people realize that. I don't know if you guys know Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks.
Yeah. Yes,
I just saw that interview.
A couple of her. She's starting to get, as they say, she's starting to get a little bit red pilled. Maybe it's only pink pilled, but she complained on her own show on Young Turks about how her condo association was charging everybody in the building to build these electric plug-ins for their vehicles, and she's like, that's crazy. I can't afford that, and then so the results of some of these policies are starting to hit her in her own face. And so, literally 20 minutes ago, she was all for this, but as soon as it affects her life, she's all against it and says, "This is crazy. We don't need to do this. This is impossible. People won't be able to afford this and that, and I can't afford it." So I'm praying that will start happening to enough people that we're able to reverse it, and that these people that are in power, whether elected or otherwise, are removed, and that we start moving back toward a liberty-based society. But a key to that is popping the bubble of climate alarmism, because that is really, it is from climate alarmism, which is completely everywhere. It is conventional wisdom. Our media lies about what the data actually shows. It elevates every extreme weather event as if it's our fault, and it's not. But if you look at the data, you can see that extreme weather is actually not on the rise. But our you would never know that speaking, if you consumed our corrupt corporate media. So you need to go out there and find this information for yourself. And one place to do that is at the Heartland Institute at heartland.org.
Yeah. Well, it's funny.
And the thing about the alarmist cult that is going on out there, they always find nice words to use, like clean energy, as if you could have such a thing. Even look at the windmills. We have a bunch of windmills out there supposed to be giving us all this clean energy, and they're killing a bunch of birds. And everybody knows this, but that's we can't mitigate that, so it's okay. The solar panels are frying birds also. It's okay. That's okay because we have clean energy, and this is the madness that's going on here. That's the central planners are taking part in this little conspiracy to get us to this clean energy at the cost of our liberties and our freedoms. So that's what's going on. God help us.
Yeah, and children in Africa are basically slave labor in Africa, mining elements like cobalt that is in that Tesla battery, in the Tesla you just paid $70,000 for. The hands of little children who are exploited to get that cobalt out of the ground is part of what you purchased. But you're not told that by anybody unless you listen to podcasts like this and you understand these things. Those solar panels are made by slave Uyghur labor in China, and then imported back to the United States. We don't have the mining capability. We don't have the manufacturing capability to transition to green energy here in the United States, even if you wanted to do it relatively morally by not exploiting children or slaves to make all of this energy. We don't have the capability to do it. So this transition is going to be on the backs of children and slaves. Mm-hmm. That's immoral. And then again, it's not justified. Carbon dioxide emitted by humans is not causing a climate catastrophe. We're not going to have the city of Miami under 7 feet of water by the end of the century. It's not going to happen. It's not. And that's what the data shows, historic data and current data. Yet you're never going to get any of that information from your mainstream corrupt corporate media.
Well, the crazy thing is that everything is, especially if you understand economics at all, everything is trade-offs, and
sure,
certainly engineering people understand this too, and the idea that unless somebody like Anna Kasparian is forced to put skin in the game, they just don't understand those trade-offs as long as they're coming from somebody else.
Yeah,
but
that's one of the great things the climate left has been able to pull off is they've been able to talk about green energy as if there are no trade-offs whatsoever. As if it's all positives and no negatives. So just as a start, highlighting the actual trade-offs, because there's, as you said, Jason, there's trade-offs in everything in life. There's always a trade-off. Talking about the destructive trade-offs of wind power to birds and bats and the ecosystem that way. Think about how much land you need for solar farms. What does that do to for instance, the ecosystem of the giant tortoise in the desert? Yeah, they don't care. They never talk about it. It's never brought up. And so that's why it's important to at least start the conversation by making them, forcing them to face up to the truth of the trade-offs of their so-called green energy utopia.
And there's even a bigger problem. I mean, besides the obvious environmental impact of wind and solar, there's even a bigger problem. Wind and solar, the energy density of wind and solar is far less than fossil fuels. So the amount of land use and that you will need to make up the amount of energy that fossil fuels can produce is going to be enormous. So think about the environmental impact as they try to make up. And this is an engineering fact. We're not talking politics here. This is an engineering fact. And so the amount of land use that they will need to make up that difference in order to get the amount of energy they need to even for us, a small city like maybe the one I live in, to provide us with the sufficient energy will be humongous. And nobody talks about that. That low energy problem, that low density problem, nobody speaks about it. I don't see that anywhere in the press, but I'm well aware of it. I used to work in the field, quite frankly.
Oh, sure. You would need to cover land the size of the state of California, where you guys are, with windmills to match the energy output that is necessary to go full green the way they say. So again, what is their intent? Their intent is not actually to replace the energy that we use. Their intent is to have us use a lot less energy, because energy is freedom. Energy is commerce. Energy is wealth. And so they're not interested in us having freedom, wealth, and commerce. They're interested in the opposite.
Indeed.
Well, yes,
Indeed.
and trade-offs, and that's the crazy thing is that they just want to throw the kitchen sink at everything. So even if you do think this is a serious problem, the bottom line is you still got to weigh it against other problems. And but this is funny too, because we're talking about sort of what we're going to do with all of this energy that we don't have, this green energy that we don't have, yet we do have fossils. Well, Biden's done a pretty good job of sort of shutting down a lot of our fossil fuels. And maybe I could bring up a visual again, James. So so on this one, this is an article from the Heartland Institute where it talks about American suppression of fossil fuels as a national disaster. And we're kind of seeing this with respect to the strategic oil reserve. They're literally going in and just draining that reserve. And I'm not sure if this was the one I had the visual on of the chart, but let me see here if I can find that. I think that this is it right here. So it just shows you the crude levels, how they've shrunk in the strategic oil reserve under Biden. We were over 600 million, I believe that is, barrels. And now it shrank to about 370, and we're going into another election season now. And it looks like we're still going to be hitting those high gas prices. So I imagine Biden is just going to keep on draining this reserve as he goes around the world trying to get other countries to pump more oil. Now, this is after he shut down all these permits and other things like that, killed the Keystone pipeline. That was his very first act in office that would have essentially set us as our energy independence, I guess you'd say, for this region anyways. Obviously, that's coming from Canada. But just the idea, and it's funny too, because Canada we think of as a fairly progressive country, and even they knew that they needed to make sure that they could tap those tar sand reserves that they had up there. But Biden wanted to virtue signal, and then he goes around the world shaking hands with the worst people in the world, trying to get their oil while he shuts down our oil. And he's talking to Venezuela, where they've got a dictator who has them on the Maduro diet, which is essentially telling you to eat rabbits, grow your own rabbits and eat them because they're out of food there. So just all kinds of crazy stuff. What do you guys think about this?
Well, you could always count on the left to come up with some crazy idea. You could always count on them. It's amazing. The Biden administration and company and all their leftist friends, they think global warming and is such a big problem. Climate change in particular is such a big problem. And we got to transition to fossil fuels. That's their narrative. But apparently, they only care about that here in America, because a barrel of oil pumped here in America, it ain't gonna is no different from a barrel of oil pumped anywhere in the world, because we are talking about the world and we're talking about climate change, which is gonna affect the world. So what could you conclude when Biden is trying to shut down fossil fuel production here in the United States, but he don't mind it being pumped someplace else in the world? I mean, some people could even call this stuff racist. Some people could call this is American imperialism, if you're really going to go by their own narrative. This is the disgusting thing about the left. As long as they could push their narrative, as long as they could control us as a society, they don't care how they get there, because their end result is to control how we live, how we think, and what we do, and how we function in society. They don't care about the logic or the lack of logic in their policies, because all of this is about control and about their power to control us. That's what this is about.
Who do you think gets oil out of the ground cleaner and in a more environmentally responsible way? The United States or Venezuela? The United States or Russia? The United States or Saudi Arabia? Of course, the answer is the United States. So if you were interested in, even if, again, give them all the benefit of the doubt. If Joe Biden is saying we still need oil because we have to transition, he even said it, I think, the other day, we're going to need oil for another 10 years. If that was the case and he was actually genuine about that, where would you want that oil pumped? It'd be in the United States. We forget, oh my gosh, as far back as the end of the Trump administration, which was 2.5 years ago, we were a net energy exporter for the first time in any of our lifetimes. We're all old enough to remember the oil price shocks of the 1970s. Yes. And the idea that the United States could be energy independent was considered a pipe dream. Trump administration policies made that happen in 3 years. And so it wasn't even that long ago that we were able to be energy independent, but we've thrown all of that away. The Biden administration has thrown all of that away. And the result is actually a dirtier environment than as if we were doing it ourselves. We should be exporting liquefied natural gas to Europe right now. We could be the supplier of natural gas to Europe instead of Russia. But we threw all that away. These are choices. These are policy choices, and they matter. And if you care about the environment, you would actually want more U.S. energy production, not less. And we're shutting it all down.
Yeah.
Good point.
I still just want my liberal friends that voted for Biden to lead from the front and shut off their entire electricity to their house for certain lengths of time during the day, and let the refrigerator just kind of don't open that door because you don't want to let that cold air out. And then lead from the front and show me how it's done. And I want them to get through the summer without ever using their air conditioning, and the winter without ever using their heat. Lead from the front, people. Show me how it's done, okay? Because unless you do, I'm just going to think you're a hypocrite.
Oh, geez, you use the H word, Tim. You should be asking, and similarly along those lines, we should ask John Kerry, who is Biden's is climate czar, or whatever the hell he calls him. Ask him to give up his private jet. Also, we should ask that too.
No, he was asked about that, and he said, "No, I need it because I need to be there in person to negotiate all of these world-changing climate agreements, and we can't." He's like, "Hey, can you do that over Zoom?" No, we can't do that over Zoom.
It's just like Lori Lightfoot shutting down the barbers during COVID, and then said, "Hey, but I got to look good."
Yeah, that's exactly.
We're going to keep the barber open for me, but
when Nancy Pelosi getting her hair blown out, remember you got to open the salon just for me. You can know how crazy these people are, these climate alarmists. You can know how crazy they are. You know who their spokesperson was for quite a while? Greta Thunberg. Or Thunberg, or however the hell you pronounce her name. She was
Thunberg.
a 16-year-old kid. A 16-year-old kid who probably don't even know her backside from her elbow was one of their spokespersons. Could you imagine that? That's how crazy these people are.
Yeah. Well,
if somebody really voted these people in, I want the voters themselves. I want the little people to lead from the front and show me how it's done. I understand that the big wigs, it's always going to be whatever they need, and they'll get whatever they need. They'll get their jets and their hairstylist. I get it. But I want the voters that voted for them. Those people are who I really want to see lead from the front and show me how it's done.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, when we talk about the trade-offs too with these people, I mean, the idea that we are getting our oil from, Biden's going hand in hand to people who are lined up against us, literally in a war footing that he's put us in. So this is kind of crazy, and that kind of brings us to our Knucklehead Noise Patrol here as we get close to the end of the show, where on The View the other day, Sunny Hostin suggested that Chinese internment of Muslims is not as bad as I guess as blacks have it, she says, here in the United States, saying that they're putting so many black people in jail here. But it kind of goes to show you sort of the weird view that goes on in some of these leftist minds of what's happening. And James, could you bring up the visual on that, or the video rather, that we have for this? We had a video clip of this.
To be taken. They want us to fight for their freedoms. And so it is shameful. It is disturbing. And our hearts go out to the trans community as they are under attack right now. But
so so anyways, we did have a clip, but I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get it up. But anyways, Sunny Hostin essentially saying that she felt like this was the that people who are literally being put in slave labor, as Jim mentioned earlier, over in China, to send us solar panels and other things like that, somehow that they don't have it that bad, that somehow we're doing a worse job on human rights here in this country. And, it's funny because, we can see that, things are getting better despite what liberals say, or I shouldn't say liberals, lefties is what I should really call them. But, things are getting better in this country. And it's just absolutely nuts to assume that somehow countries that are literally engaged in
genocide,
almost,
okay?
an ethnic cleansing, a genocide,
Yes.
is somehow doing a better job than us, and we're going there to essentially get our stuff from them as well. We're asking people aligned with them to get our oil and our energy from, even though we've had people come and tell us, hey, look, this stuff is happening, and it's just horrifying, the stuff that is happening to some of these people, just grabbed right off the street and thrown in internment camps to be slave labor. It's just crazy. What do you guys think about that?
I'll just start, if you don't mind, because I've railed against this in the past, where the United States per capita incarcerated more people than any other country for quite a while, including China. And most of those for victimless crimes related to the so-called war on drugs, but which, by the way, the drugs won, in case you're wondering. And it looks like our total amount has gone down since then. I don't know how we compare worldwide anymore. Hard to say that the conditions in an American prison are worse than the conditions in a Chinese prison. It's just more leftist gobbledygook.
Well, it's not leftist. It's just not leftist gobbledygook. This is lunacy. Okay, all right. I mean, she is trying to make the point that some or the other, I guess the police is just walking around and just throwing black people in jail. Okay, I think that's what she's kind of saying without using those words. Like some or the other, the police will see me on the street and say, "Oh, you look like a good candidate to go to jail right now," as if that is happening in America today. The fact of the matter is, the reason why we have blacks in prison at disproportionate rates is because we blacks, if I'm going to use a collective term, commit a disproportionate amount of the crime. It's an unfortunate truth. I mean, I don't even like to admit that, but it is true. I can't lie about the data. I'm not like them, the government, the government going to lie about the data. They're going to tell you, well, even here is a lie, to be honest, because they look at and here's another thing of the left, They look at the disproportionate, the rate of black incarceration, the rate at which they are in prison, and they say, well, it is mass incarceration. Now think about the use of that word, mass incarceration, as if the government is just walking around and throwing blacks in prison. So we have this mass incarceration, this epidemic of mass incarceration. No, that's not what's going on. Okay? We have an unfortunate truth to deal with. The fact that blacks commit a disproportionate amount of crime here in the United States. It's an unfortunate truth. I hate to be saying that myself, but it's true. I can't lie about the data like they do. They love to lie about the data. I'm not going to.
Okay.
Well, I mean, just one last thing about the solar panels being built by Uyghur slaves in Chinese prison camps, concentration camps. We are importing those solar panels to generate energy in lieu of, say, a natural gas generating plant. Natural gas plant to generate electricity for towns and communities and all of that stuff. And so we are trading out actually jobs by Americans that is done cleanly for slave labor in China to replace that American-made energy. And again, the environmental left, the eco-left, is never held to account for that fact. This is a fact. And you need to, if you're going to advocate for this, you have to own all of it, which includes the immoral way that those things are made and sent to the United States. And they're shipped to the United States, of course, on diesel-powered ships. So, the whole thing is a complete scam, but it's also immoral, and the environmental left needs to own it. We need to make them own it.
Right. Yes.
Jim, do you think that Anna Kasparian wouldn't mind as long as it's not her skin in the game making those solar panels?
Maybe, and that's actually the irony. Is like, the people on the left, like to pose as the great, as great humanitarians, as people who care about human rights around the globe. They don't give two craps about the people in China. They don't. They just close their eyes to it. Yes. And, you and I, the people on this podcast and the people who listen to this podcast are well-rounded people who are well-informed about what's going on in the world, because we don't just depend on sources like The View or, or NBC News or something like that to get our news. But, a lot of people do. A great majority of people do. I have members of my family who only consume our corrupt corporate media, and they have no idea of any of the stuff that we're talking about. And we're talking about the truth. We are talking about things that are actually happening in this world. And there is a grand swath of people in this country that are wholly ignorant of this. And if you tell it to them, they won't believe you, because they're being brainwashed by a corrupt media that is only pushing one narrative. We didn't used to have media like that in this country, but we do now. And even with the rise of social media, what happens when people try to put out the actual truth about what's happening in this country? They're suppressed by, again, the same power structure that is peddling propaganda to the masses. Yes. So this is a tough fight, guys, and it's going to be a long road, but I'm so glad that we're in it together.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, and I can't help but feel it's like a 2-minute hate against the deniers, is what we see coming from the left media so much. But James, maybe you could get the visual up real quick so we can let people know more about Heartland Institute. So do you have any final thoughts real quick, Jim, you want to share with us about Heartland Institute and, what people can get out of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you believe in freedom like we do, I mean, you can't be passive about it anymore. I mean, these are pretty dangerous times right now, and I try not to think this negatively, although I'm usually the resident cynic anywhere I'm at. You guys are pretty tough to out cynic, but yeah, I think I did pretty well on this podcast. But this is a real fight. It's a worthy fight, and I really do think that we're approaching a bit of a precipice here that we may never be able to scramble back up on. So if you wanted to learn more about, what's really happening out there, especially on energy and environment policy, definitely visit heartland.org and listen to this podcast and see if YouTube maybe brings up some suggestions for other podcasts to think about and consume those and talk about the importance of liberty. Inform people who are ignorant about what's really happening in the world. And, one by one, we may have enough influence to turn this around.
Yeah. Just keep in mind, too, if you're out there listening, it's usually the people who are trying to suppress the information that are the bad guys out there.
Always.
So anyways, but thanks again so much for joining us today, Jim. It was great having you on. And to our audience, thanks for tuning in. And until the next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.